Welcome back, class. Today we are looking at section 8.2, solving equations by factoring ax squared plus bx plus c. So in this lesson, I will show you how to find the roots of a quadratic function algebraically. So we're not going to be looking at a graph to identify the x-intercepts or the zeros. Instead, we're going to be solving the problem algebraically. So let me show you how to do that. And we're going to be using what's called the bottoms-up method. In explain 1a, we want to solve the equation 2x squared plus 7x minus 4. Notice how the expression on the left side is a trinomial. So if you're given a trinomial, use the bottoms-up method, and it goes like this. So the first step is to identify a, b, and c. And if you don't have an a, b, and c value, the bottoms-up method is not going to work. Here are the steps. So I've identified a, b, and c. Now I want to draw an x. Sometimes they call this the x method. So I'll go between the x method and the bottoms-up method. So at the top, you're going to write out the values of a and c, and you're going to multiply them. And at the bottom of the x, you're going to write the value of b. Okay, so we know a is 2 and c is -4. 2 times -4 is -8, and at the bottom we have 7. Now we need to think of two numbers that will multiply to -8, but will add up to 7. Once again, we need to think of two numbers that will multiply to -8, but will add up to 7. So I'll give you a second to think of the numbers. Great. So the two numbers that will multiply to -8 but will add up to 7 are 8 and -1. So 8 times -1 is -8, and 8 plus -1 is +7. Now that you have those numbers, you want to take those numbers and divide by whatever a is. And a is 2. And then reduce your fractions if possible, but keep your answer in fraction form. 8 divided by 2, we can reduce that. 8 and 2 are both divisible by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 2 divided by 2 is 1. And I'll circle it because that's done. The -1/2 cannot be simplified, so I'll go ahead and leave this fraction as is. Now it's time for us to write out our factors. So I'm going to use the fractions to write them out. At the bottom, I'll put x's. And the reason why I'm putting x's is because when you take the 1x and the 2x, 1x times 2x is going to give us the 2x squared. Remember how earlier I told you that this method was called the bottoms-up method? Well, here's why. Now we're going to write out the factors from the bottom up. The factors are, you can put 1x plus 4, or you can put x plus 4 times the second fraction, which is 2x minus 1. Write it from the bottom up, equals 0. Now we're going to use the zero product property to solve. So I'm going to take each factor and just set it equal to 0. X plus 4 equals 0, and 2x minus 1 equals 0. Let's solve each one. In the first equation, I want to subtract 4 to both sides. That's going to give me x equals -4. In my second equation, I want to add 1 to both sides, which will give me 2x equals 1. Now let's divide by 2. X equals 1/2. So my solutions are x equals -4 and x equals 1/2. Let me show you how to check your work. So we have 2x squared plus 7x minus 4 equals 0. I'm going to check x equals -4. So when x equals -4, we have 2 times -4 squared plus 7 times negative 4 minus 4 equals 0. Negative 4 squared is 16. 7 times negative 4 is negative 28 minus 4 equals 0. 32 minus 28 minus 4, that's going to give us negative 32 equals 0. And 32 minus 32 is 0. 0 equals 0. So notice how this checks, which means that x equals negative 4 is a solution. Now let's check 1/2. So when x equals 1/2, we have 2x squared plus 7x minus 4 equals 0. So take the 1/2 and plug it in. 2 times 1/2 squared plus 7 times 1/2 minus 4 equals 0. So that's 2 times 1/2 squared is 1/4. Plus 7 times 1/2, that's 7/2, minus 4 equals 0. So 2 times 1/4 is 2/4 plus 7/2 minus 4 equals 0. Class, 2/4 is, if you reduce it, that's going to be 1/2 plus 7/2 minus 4 equals 0. I'm running out of space, so I'll continue on here. 1/2 plus 7/2 is 8/2 minus 4 equals 0. And 8/2 is 4, and 4 minus 4 is 0. So it checks, which means that x equals 1/2 is also a solution. Now let's move on to our next problem. Let's look at explain 1b. So once again, I'm going to use the bottoms up method, or you can call it the X method. And I know to use this method because if you look at the left-hand side of the equation, we have a trinomial. So step number 1, let's identify A, B, and C. A is 12, B is 11, and C is positive 2. Step number 2, let's draw our X. And at the top, we're going to put A times C, and at the bottom, we're going to put B. So 12 times 2 is 24. And at the bottom, we're going to write down 11. So now we need to think of two numbers that will multiply to 24, but will add up to 11. We need two numbers that will multiply to 24, but will add up to 11. Go ahead and think about it. I'll give you a second. Great. So the two numbers that will multiply to 24, but will add up to 11 are 8 and 3. 8 times 3 is 24, and 8 plus 3 is 11. Now let's take those numbers and divide by A. So you might be wondering, Mrs. Orca, once we have these numbers, are we always going to divide by A? And the answer is yes, always divide by A. A in this case is 12. Now let's reduce our fractions. 8 and 12 are both divisible by 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 12 divided by 4 is 3. Circle it and write the X at the bottom. 3 over 12, 3 and 12 are both divisible by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. Now let's put the X at the bottom. The X's will always be at the bottom. Now let's write out our factors. Write the factors from the bottom up. So it's 3x plus 2 times 4x plus 1 equals 0. Now let's use the zero product property to solve for x. Set each factor equal to 0. And we get 3x plus 2 equals 0, and 4x plus 1 equals 0. In our first equation, let's subtract 2 to both sides. We get 3x equals negative 2. Now let's divide by 3. X equals negative 2/3. In our second equation, we have 4x plus 1 equals 0. So let's subtract 1 to both sides. We get 4x equals negative 1. Divide by 4. X equals negative 1/4. So our solutions are negative 2/3 and negative 1/4.